folks, how's it going? Hello. Sorry for the delay. Had some internet issues here, but I think it's all good now. Looks like the connection is stable, no dropped frames, so we're good to go. How's everyone doing? Happy what is it, Thursday? Thursday, huh? Man, how the time flies. Seems like just yesterday it was Wednesday. You know what I mean? It's okay, we have good show coming up with the opening lab. And yeah, and then afterwards actually I'll be doing some game recaps. Doing the part 2 and showing the second half of first of my recent tournaments. Hey Adam, how's it going? Looks like we don't have too many folks in the chat. I think partly due to the multiple false starts, but we'll get there. Let's see. How is actually I was wondering what's happening with Hikaru. I know he started off well in his match as expected. And I'm wondering what is it at? 13.5, 3.5 for Hikaru. So it looks like he's probably gonna win. And they're finishing the 3-1 section right now. I see. So they're gonna go to bullet next, and it's probably not gonna get any easier. Oof. People being very, very mean towards David Bravian in the Twitch chat. It's like, come on, guys. He's a very strong player. Hikaru is just stronger. You know, it's just like it's just how it goes. You know, sometimes even at the highest levels, you know, you can have someone who's much stronger than the next guy. Magnus was also very, very dominant in his first match against Gukesh, which I think finished like 23-7 or so. I'm guessing this one will be like a similar score probably. Yeah, Twitch chat being rude. You don't really hear about that too often, do you? Right. What's up, Neve Storth? We have a lot of new fan accounts in our Twitch. There's a Kostya fan, there's a Jesse fan. I think there's a David fan as well. There's a lot of anonymous accounts floating around these days, which is fun. Okay, well we'll leave Hikaru to it, and yeah, shout out to the OG Pravid Duis, the original Stan account, Dojo Stan. Okay, let's get into the opening lab. So every month I do a show called the Opening Lab, where I take questions from Patreon and then do a little research and answer them on the show. And lately we haven't been getting too many questions, so after I go through the Patreon questions, I then just open it up to the chat, and I'm happy to answer opening questions off the cuff for for the rest of the time, which usually ends up being pretty interesting. So yeah, let's get into it. Bring up the questions here, and first one comes from David Stewart. Let me actually move this up a little bit. There we go. Let me kill the music as well. So yeah, David's always asking good questions here. And this time he says, I'm working on a bit of a different idea recently. Usually David, yeah, he's asking about the Catalan. But this time, let's see, it says, I'm looking to become a bit less predictable, so I've started mixing some Sicilian into my repertoire. That's great. Sicilian's a very nice opening. I definitely highly recommend people to play the Sicilian. It's just fun. It's just more fun than a lot of the other options. Okay, that people are choosing. Anyway, I played the dragon against the open, but what can I do against the Alapin, the C3 Sicilian, which seems more common at lower levels? Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Let's go to the board. So the Alapin Sicilian, aka the C3 Sicilian, is pretty popular. I would say it's one of the more popular sidelines that folks will typically face when playing the Sicilian. I know when I was doing the Sicilian speed run, I would probably get C3 Sicilians like every other game or so. So yeah, they're very, very common, along with other sidelines like the close Sicilian or like knight C3 followed by G3, and then building up with this kind of setup, and then also like the Grand Prix attack, I would say is pretty common at lower levels as well. So yeah, C3 Sicilian is a very logical choice. I played this a couple times when I was just starting out, and yeah, the idea is very simple. White just wants to capture the full center and not let black exchange off their C pawn for one of white's center pawns, right? The whole idea behind the Sicilian is to try to get an extra center pawn for black. So here white fights against this, and there's essentially two main approaches I think that are very, very solid and will take a player a long way. Personally, I've always liked playing knight f6 in this position, so attacking the pawn and not giving white a chance to establish the full center with d4, because the e pawn will be hanging. Typically, white advances here with e5, because if they just like defend the pawn with like d3 or something, well then they're kind of not really achieving their main idea of c3, right, which is to push for d4. And I think black is already fine. You can go e5 and just develop your pieces, fight for the center, and everything is pretty solid here. So I've always liked this one because it provokes white to advance with e5, which players usually do, and then black gets this really nice square on d5 for the knight. Where if white just like continues to kick the knight with like c4, then again they're giving up this d4 idea, and then they're really going to be weak on the dark squares here. So black drops back, like let's say knight c7, and then this knight comes out, and then this knight can come to e6, and then black just gets total control over this d4 square. So what usually happens in this line is white plays d4. They kind of take over the center, but the point is that black was able to establish this really nice outpost on d5, and then after black plays e6 here and d6, I've always felt like this is kind of a very playable structure for black, where it's kind of like an isolated queen pawn type of position where white is often going to be having a weak pawn or two in the center, but on the flip side, white will get certain attacking chances on the king side. So I've always liked these setups, like with d6 here. Let's say white plays knight f3, black goes d6, bishop e7, castles, and so on. The light squared bishop can go to b7, where it's placed really, really nicely on this diagonal. And yeah, strategically, I've just always really liked black's chances in these structures. This knight usually going to d7. So this is definitely one option. I would definitely say this one is maybe more suited for higher rated players, because white does get certain attacking chances here. And you know, not everyone wants to just be like defending their king as black. So personally, I feel fine in this kind of position, and I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, it might not be everyone's cup of tea. So my main recommendation actually would be to just play d5 here, and this is the other kind of tried and tested way of for black to deal with the c3 Sicilian. You see, like both of these methods, they're like both attacking the e4 square, which is kind of important. And with d5, what black essentially does is kind of forces white to take on d5. Because if e5 here, then knight c6, and black gets beautiful control over the center, and the bishop can still come out, and black can just get a fantastic French and just stand really, really comfortably. So after d5, this kind of like delayed Scandinavian approach, queen takes d5. Of course, the big point is that white is committed to this c3 move and can't challenge this queen on d5. So black's queen on d5 actually stands quite well. And yeah, I would say this one is a little bit easier for black compared to the knight of 6 lines. Objectively, you know, they both stand absolutely fine, and they're both being played by top players. But I would say this one is maybe a little bit simpler for black to play, so I would probably recommend this. What usually happens here is at a certain point, white's going to go d4, and eventually black will take on d4 and leave white with an isolated queen pawn. And it's definitely not the end of the world for white. It's a very, very playable structure, but I've always felt like these structures are a little bit easier for black to play. Black kind of has less to prove, not having to babysit this weakness. So there's a couple different setups here that black can try. I looked at things a little bit. I think the easiest is to go knight c6 here, just putting pressure on the pawn. Usually white will play knight f3, then knight f6, just bringing the other knight out. And depending on what white does here, black can either play bishop g4 next move, and even think about castling queenside and playing very actively and putting pressure against this d-pawn. Or black can play much more solid with a move like e6, bishop e7, and then castling kingside. So, for example, if white goes bishop e2 here, then I would say e6 is a good approach here. Bishop g4, a little bit less effective when white has already kind of can immediately kind of challenge this bishop with h3. So I would say e6, castles, let's say bishop e7, and yeah, I think black is totally fine here. If white takes on c5, we can take with the queen or trade queens and take with the bishop. Essentially, it's a very solid position. Black just needs to castle, get the bishop out, probably to like b6, bishop b7 would be the normal way, or somehow bishop d7, bishop c6. And yeah, strategically, I think black is doing really well here. So this is kind of like one just sample line. I also want to note, like a lot of players as white, they like to try out these like tricky knight a3 moves with the idea of looking for like knight to b5 and then looking for some kind of fork on c7, or maybe getting a tempo with bishop to c4. And here I would say this one is really nicely dealt with bishop to g4. So this is kind of an idea I want to highlight. Just putting pressure on the knight and also putting a lot of pressure on the d-pawn. And if white plays knight to b5 here, threatening a very unpleasant knight c7 check, here black can just castle, and white just doesn't have enough development here to really do anything on the queen side. Black is way ahead in development. We can play like a6 to kick the knight away. We're threatening to take on d4 and essentially just crash through in the center already. So I think black is doing really well here. So this is kind of a cool idea to keep in mind. But yeah, essentially knight c6, knight f6. I think most players will probably just go bishop e2 here, and then e6, bishop comes out, castles. Another approach is to just take on d4 here. And after c takes d4, bishop e7, black is just going to be playing against the isolated queen pawn. Once again, the bishop wants to get to b7. We have this d5 square. White can, of course, play knight c3 and challenge our queen. And the main thing to kind of remember is that the queen in these positions usually goes to d6. It looks a little bit in the way, but I think it's actually quite normally placed here. It covers some squares, and once again, the main idea for black is to just get the bishop to b7. Eventually, the rooks can come to the center, and we're just playing against this weak pawn. We're trying to trade off minor pieces, and yeah, the more pieces we exchange, the less attacking chances white has. So that's kind of the general strategic idea about this position, or these types of positions, that I think is probably even more important to understand and internalize than any of these individual lines. You're playing against the weak pawn in the center. You're trying to trade minor pieces, win that pawn eventually, and then win some kind of pawn up endgame. That's the game plan. Good luck. All right, so I think that'll do it. Long story short, d5 here is simple and straightforward. Knight f6 also very interesting, especially if black wants kind of a more dynamic position. This is also totally playable. Okay, David, hopefully that helps. Let's go to the next question. And scroll a little bit more. Okay, next one comes from Kirk, who says, let's continue in our Italian journey. E4, E5. Let's put it on the board. Let's see here, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3, d6, castles, a6, bishop b3, bishop a7, bishop e3. Okay, to take or not to take on e3. Give white an open f file or get the knight c6 dislocated to a7. Okay, Kirk, yeah, actually very, very important question, because, I mean, this is a very specific position, of course, that we can definitely talk about. But in general, this bishop e3 idea can come up in all kinds of move orders or positions in the Italian game. Also, like in the Ruy Lopez, you can get this. So it is a known idea, and I think a lot of times it's easy to kind of not react in the right way. So yeah, in terms of this line in particular, I mean, I think this one makes a lot of sense when white is playing like the c3, d3, kind of like slow Italian. And yeah, one of black's more solid approaches is to tuck the bishop on a7 here. So bishop b3, getting out of the way of like knight a5, bishop a7, and then now bishop e3. I would say it's not the most common approach for white. Generally, I feel like these days white is usually playing for like knight d2 first, and like rook e1 or h3, rook e1, knight f1, and then kind of bringing the knight around first and then deciding what to do with the bishop. But you do get a lot of players playing this one and just trying to trade off the bishops. So to make it real simple, I've never really trusted the structures after takes, because in my opinion, I just feel like this open f file just makes it real simple and straightforward for white. And you can get in trouble really easily here as black. So, I mean, we're going to have to castle, and yeah, the issue is that white just gets this kind of like ready-made attacking plan, like queen e1, queen h4, where the queen can go to g3 as well. You can double the rooks on the f file. The knight also very often uses the h4 square. So let's say, for example, like queen e1, queen g3, knight h4, and then there's like knight f5 ideas. There's also sacrifices on f6 if you're not careful. So yeah, it's really, really easy to just get mated here as black with this open f file. And there are definitely positions where it's completely playable, and I believe this is even one of them. But I don't know, just from what I've seen, I've never really felt like there's a ton of upside here from black's point of view. Maybe if you can get like some really like quick like counterplay in the center with like d5, you might be fine. But the issue is, even when you go like d5 in these positions, it's often not like such a huge deal. Like white can take, knight takes, and then white still has two pawns in the center. So strategically, like I believe white is doing okay in these positions, and then white can kind of continue like queen e1 or queen e2 and then d4, and yeah, to my eyes, a lot of times black just kind of falls under some pressure here, and yeah, I never really understood the point of allowing all this. So, my approach here would be to just leave the bishop on a7, and then probably take with the rook. Because a lot of times, what I like to do in these positions is like bring the knight around over to g6. So it'll probably be the rook that's recapturing on a7, and yeah, it's a little bit annoying. Like you lose some time, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think white can really do anything with this tempo. Like at a certain point, you'll just play rook a8, and yeah, I feel like there's not a whole lot that white can really do here to black that's so dangerous. So yeah, if you have access to a database, I think there's like definitely some games in this position that you can check out. And from what I saw, I think most players are just kind of leaving the bishop on a7 and not really messing with bishop takes e3. Because the issue is like in some positions, it might be like totally playable and even the right thing to do. But then, what usually happens is you just get some random move order during your game. You don't really remember or know for sure, right? And so white just plays this bishop e3 move at some point, and maybe you have h6 included, maybe there's h3, maybe without, and it's hard to remember like, oh, when was I supposed to take or not take? So in general, I would just say don't mess with it. I think it's too dangerous. So yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much answers the question. I wish I could give more detail, but yeah, I have kind of more of a practical approach to these kinds of positions where I just don't see the benefit to allowing this. And from black's point of view, I feel like it's often quite logical to try to trade bishops with bishop e6, either with the rook on e8 or without, and just trying to take with the pawn. And yeah, there's many lines where black tries to get this structure themselves and then plays for that same kind of kingside attacking setup plan with queen e8, queen g6, knight h5, and so on, which I think is, it's not like a crushing attack or anything, but it's kind of nice to play chess when you have like a direct plan. So yeah, long story short, I would be very, very careful about allowing this structure unless you absolutely know what you're doing. Okay, question from the chat, and then I'll probably open it up just to any opening questions that people may have. What book do you advise to study the Joko piano in the main middle game plan? Yeah, Alessio, I'm not sure actually. I'm not really familiar with a lot of the books on these structures. I feel like there's been a lot of courses released in the last couple of years on the Italian from both like white's point of view and black's point of view. But yeah, I don't have any huge recommendations because I haven't really studied these positions from either side for some time myself. But from black's point of view, I'd imagine like Jan Gustafsson has some good stuff. I've always liked his like e4, e5 materials. I'm sure there's other e4, e5 repertoires as well that probably cover the positions. From white's point of view, I don't remember exactly who has like covered these positions for white. I feel like Wesley So, part of his chessable repertoire was the Italian, but I'm not sure exactly like which lines he recommended or anything like that. Yeah, there's been some courses, but I mean, these positions are like really detailed. There's so many nuances and differences with the structure, and this was the case even like a couple years ago. Like all this like a6 and a5 stuff like didn't exist. Basically, you played a6 or you played bishop b6, and then that was it. And then white like never played a4. Like a4 was just not a thing. So even before like all the a4 stuff, it was still very complicated, and it was like so many move orders and different plans and ideas and setups, because black also has like different approaches. And yeah, even then it was really hard, I think, to understand. And then White started playing like all this like a4 b4 stuff, and now it turns out like, oh, in addition to the king side attack, White can also do something on the queen side. So it got extremely complicated just in the last several years. So Legion saying, yeah, Geary covers this for White. Yeah, actually that definitely makes sense. I feel like Geary seems like a big expert in these kinds of positions, probably from both colors. Yeah, the nice thing though is that there's like a ton of material in these positions, and if you just find a player that you like really kind of feel like can feel connected with, or somehow understand, then that's good, because then you can just kind of follow what they're doing. So like Ding Liren, for example, like always plays like the black side of these like very like consistent ways. I think like with a5, and like Nakamura as well has his approach. Magnus has played these positions a bunch. Geary, Aronian, like Caruana. So all the top players have essentially played these positions from at least one, maybe both colors. So that's the cool thing, is that there's just a ton of material that you can look at. But it's, I don't know. I don't really know of a great resource that really, really, breaks it down, because even like these repertoires, usually what, they just kind of like, they come up with one option, right? Like they don't really like, show you the wide range of possibilities. Geary did a lecture on the Italian for like Chess Base India. I feel like he often does very good interviews with them. That would make sense. I'm sure that would be very, very instructive. But yeah, probably like with most things, I mean, the best is to just to try to get some practical experience with the opening. You probably learn more during like a classical game than you do, just kind of looking at games in the database. Okay, so that'll do it, I think, for the Patreon questions, and I'll just open it up to any opening questions that people have. See, we had a couple already that I'll quickly get to. And yeah, I can't promise I know everything, because I don't, but I can at least give you my initial, my 2 cents, my 2 cents for free. Okay. Is a Taimanov an opening to fight for a win as black, or more of a gimmick opening? No, Taimanov is very real opening. I mean, yeah, it's a Sicilian, like any other. It has its pros and cons. I think it's a little bit tougher to handle from White's point of view for lower levels, because it's one of the few openings against which the English attack doesn't really feel that effective, right? So if White just kind of plays, let's say very stereotypically, then black gets bishop b4 and knight f6, and this is very playable, but it's easy to get in trouble here as White if you don't really know what you're doing. But no, the Taimanov is very normal opening. I mean, a lot of times the structure just kind of transforms into like a Scheveningen, which is like similar to like a Najdorf And yeah, it's a definitely very reasonable Sicilian to play. It's just a kind of more of a particular move order. Main difference is with this one compared to, let's say, the Con Sicilian, which is like pretty similar, is that here it's easier for white to play c4, whereas against knight c6, c4, this one is a little bit, well, a lot a bit not as good. After bishop b4, it's hard for white can't go bishop d3 here because the knight's hanging like they'd be able to if the pawn was on a6. So because this isn't that comfortable for white, white has to end up trading knights and giving away some center control. It's like white's not able to establish this c4 grip. So that's kind of the point behind this move order, is that it's not letting white play c4 as comfortably. But yeah, real opening. Am I in St. Louis? No, I am not. I'm in Los Angeles for a little bit, but I'll be going to St. Louis next week. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, those rules to learn the Italian game are very, very useful. At least it gives you some basics. Have I been happy with my own openings as of late? Um, yeah, you know, who's happy with their openings these days, huh? Like who's I'm happy with some stuff, but there's always issues. There's always there's always issues. Yeah. I mean, I've come to the conclusion that it's really important to believe in what you play. So, my main approach as of late has been to play openings that I genuinely enjoy or lead to positions that I want to play. So yeah, the issue is like I maybe don't know the lines as well as I could, but yeah, I'd rather play something I don't know that well but is more interesting versus something that I'm more familiar with and used to, but kind of lacking some luster. Keddy bringing the King's Indian into disrepute. What do you mean? What's that about? I'm going to set up game analysis in the meantime. Folks, if you have more opening questions, feel free to send them our way. Afterwards, it will be probably going to go on and do some game recaps. Finish out one of the latest events. Ready. There we go. Yeah, Lauren, open to everyone. Yeah. What I've been doing is I've been tackling the Patreon questions first, and then just opening it up to everyone, which is where we are now. Okay. Can I quickly go over the main positional plans in the Cozio? Yeah, absolutely. Wait, remind me the Cozio of the move order, because I always confuse it. I feel like it's one of the like knight e7 lines. Yeah, so knight c6, bishop b5, and then knight g7 here. Got it. Yeah, okay. Right, so here Black's idea, right, is usually to put the knight on g6. Actually, there's a couple of ways of playing it. Nowadays, a lot of players, they just go g6, bishop g7. The old way was to put the knight on g6, bishop b7, which I think is kind of out of fashion. But yeah, the idea here, I think, is to put the bishop on g7. So there's, yeah, different approaches that white can take here. I've always felt like the most direct is to just go for like c3 and d4 and try to take over the center. So let's say here, g6, d4, take, bishop g7, and yeah, I would be thinking about, taking some space here with d5. Sometimes these can go different ways. Like sometimes black will throw in a6 and you drop the bishop back, and then g6, and then I would go ahead and play d4 anyway. But yeah, it kind of depends how black reacts to this advance. So you might get like b5 here, and then you can choose between bishop b3, bishop c2. I'm not sure which one is better. Let's say this one. And yeah, I feel like you often get this kind of structure from these lines. Black will go bishop g7, castle, put the pawn on d6, and then white gets like knight c3, castles, and you kind of get this nice center, but it's not always clear what to do with it, because if you play d5, you block your own bishop, and then e5 might be kind of risky. So I don't have a ton of detail here on how to play this exactly, but yeah, I feel like you try to take the center, like with the c3, d4, and then you kind of try to play actively beyond that. So yeah, let's see. Sometimes right, black will try like d5 kind of stuff as well. But black has to be careful, because if they do it too early, then there could be some tactical issues. But this is another thing that black can kind of try in these types of positions. And yeah, then I would imagine like the most aggressive approach here would be to take and castle and try to make use of the open e file and play knight c3 and really make it tough here for black to complete their development. Yeah, but right, I feel like usually what you get is something like d6, some kind of position like this. And yeah, then I'm not totally sure how white should play this one. I'd imagine there have to be some games you could check out that maybe demonstrate like some plan or something to look for, because it's not easy. I mean, like in blitz, okay, you can like do whatever, like go h4, h5, or knight c3, bishop e3, queen d2, but yeah, I don't know what's actually best here. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these positions definitely not so simple. Yeah, there's also other approaches like with knight c3 that are maybe a little bit trickier. Like I know there's like this kind of idea, like d4 takes, knight d5, this kind of thing, which can be very very dangerous. Yeah, like if I'm not mistaken, there's kind of a famous trap where you can take and take, which is a nice way to win a game. So it'd be great if every game went like this, but I'm pretty sure probably black has a way to avoid this this fiasco. But yeah, that's another one you can you can look into. I mean, in blitz, you might get a one or two folks. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stompfest, for the bits. much appreciated. Okay, next question. What are my thoughts on the Scotch Gambit for expert and above level players? Yeah, Scotch Gambit is very playable. I would say it's playable all the way up to the GM level. I feel like there's a few grandmasters that are kind of playing it regularly. So, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to get an advantage against e4, e5. So you have to try something. And the Scotch Gambit, at least, it's kind of sharp and interesting, and not as like, I think people focus more on like Rui Lopez, an Italian game, and stuff. So not as might be a good like surprise weapon as well. Yeah, it's definitely sharper than your average slow Italian. Um, okay, let's see. Braden asked, "What are the most important takeaways you should have as a Nimzo Indian player? Like, what are the common plans?" Um, yeah, Nimzo's cool. I feel like Nimzo is just kind of perfect opening. The real issue with the Nimzo is that White doesn't have to play into it. White can play knight f3 or g3, and then you have to kind of figure out something else. But the Nimzo, you get this bishop out to b4, and you can always just like take and just play that, and yeah, really straightforward for Black to play, and you have like multiple options against all of White's main approaches. So yeah, I played Nimzo for a few years, and I think most players do. It's like such a solid opening. It's hard to not play it because it's just so very tempting. But then yeah, I got tired of like playing this position. I played like Bogo Indian, and I played d5 for a bit, and never really found anything I liked so much here. So yeah, the real struggle is what to do against this one. The Bogo is with bishop b4 check, and it's very playable, but it just leads to like slightly worse positions often. And well, this is essentially the so-called flamingo repertoire. You can see Jesse's video on our channel about this, where the idea is that you're just playing bishop b4 and trading this off against whatever, knight d2, knight c3, bishop d2, just doesn't matter. You're just hacking at some point and then playing on the dark squares with knight c6 and e5. I mean, I think it's a very simple and straightforward repertoire, but yeah, I don't know. At a certain point, right, you just kind of grow a little bit tired of playing the slightly worse position. But Nimzo itself, Nimzo proper, I feel like no real drawbacks here. If White wants to play something sharp and aggressive, they have to try like f3, for example, or queen c2. But both of these moves, they give Black a lot of counter chances, and you have like lots of interesting lines to choose from here, like c5, d5. Both lead to positions that I think strategically are more interesting for Black. Because in the long run, what often happens is Black is the one that ends up with like the better structure. White maybe gets some activity, but it's nice when you have the long-term structural advantage, because you kind of have that nice endgame that you're playing for. Yeah, I guess there are a lot of lines that White can try. So, and there is a lot of danger. Like you can't just play with your hand, so to speak, and just kind of follow the same setup every game, because eventually you will find someone that knows what they're doing. For instance, in like the queen c2 lines, White can try to really play sharp here with e4 and stuff, and so you have to be careful. So you can't just kind of like wing it. You have to know a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. The issue for Black, I mean, there's lots of solid setups. This one is, of course, doing totally fine for Black, although it's a little bit sharp. You do have to kind of know what you're doing, but you can also play d5 here, and it's absolutely fine. So yeah, Nimzo, fun opening. Knight f3 playing against this one, less so. Yeah, Queen's Indian is also an option here. Queen's Indian is pretty solid. But my issue with the Queen's Indian is that if White really wants to be a jerk, they can go g3. And now you don't get your Nimzo, and you don't get your Queen's Indian either, because White gets bishop g2, and then Black's not in time. He can go d5 here, but this isn't what Black really wants. Now essentially we're just playing a Catalan with an early b6, and White will quickly put a lot of pressure on this one. So against g3, a lot of players, they just end up going d5 here, and it's like now you have to know Nimzo, Queen's Indian, and you have to know Catalan as well. So that was always the bummer for me about the Queen's Indian. The accelerated Queen's Indian I haven't looked into too much, but right, one of the main dangers here is f3, where white tries to just take the center. But I would also say knight c3 is kind of annoying, because after bishop b7, let's say, I mean, white can even go, let's say, knight f3, e6, and a3. White kind of gets a nice version of this where they stopped bishop b4. Though this is, of course, very, very solid for black. But yeah, f3 here would be kind of the key line to watch out for sure. Let's see, any thoughts on the hyper accelerated dragon? So yeah, I don't really know the difference between, actually, I guess this is the hyper accelerated, and then this is like the normal accelerated dragon. Right, so yeah, there's like some move order differences based on whether you want to allow like the Rossolimo, which is very playable. I think a lot of accelerated dragon players, they do this one, like Gelfin, Dubov. I think they usually start with this. Or you can play g6 here, avoid the Rossolimo, but then this allows white kind of a better version of takes and queen takes d4. I think this is a little bit annoying, or at least it's another line that black has to deal with, like knight f6, e5, and I don't really know how this goes here and here or something. Yeah, I don't really have a ton of thoughts. I feel like knight c6 is probably the more solid approach if you want to get into the accelerated dragon with g6 and so on. Okay, thank you, Chesspawn, for the bits. Alrighty, folks. I think I'm going to switch gears and get into some recaps. Got 5 games left in the first Norm tournament that I played in Charlotte just a few weeks ago, and yeah, actually, last question. No worries. Last question. All good. The Magnus Exchange French. Yeah, that I remember that one. I remember when he played it in like, it was like Granky or somewhere, and then everyone was very confused. Yeah, takes. Or he also did it. I feel like he did it from a Petrov move order, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Bishop d3, bishop d6, queen e2 check, and then apparently black doesn't have like a super great answer here. Like every move had this draw. Like bishop e6, you get like some c4 ideas. If queen e7, the idea is to take, and then either you have to lose your castling right or go bishop e7, and then yeah, you get bishop f4. Or bishop e7 here and then bishop f4. I mean, I imagine it's nothing special. Like I can't. I feel like black must be fine in this structure, but yeah, a little bit unpleasant. You know, you have a symmetrical position and white has an extra tempi or two. You know, it's not the most fun. Exchange French is one of the things that, yeah, I think turns a lot of players off from playing the French. The fact that white can always just get a very, very dry position and kind of torture you with their willingness or lack thereof to play something aggressive. So yeah, Magnus tried this as white a couple times. So I mean, I think it is a little bit annoying, but I imagine black is fine. I don't know how, but I feel like it's got to be no big deal. Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you for the questions. Always more interesting with questions. Thanks for following, Ty Roxel. Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to take a quick break and then set up the next segments where I'm going to go through some of my recent OTB games from one of my tournaments in Charlotte. So yeah, some interesting games. I look forward to sharing them with you all. But yeah, I'll need a few minutes quickly to get that set up. So yeah, gonna take a short break and then hopefully we'll see you all here afterwards.